So before I present some evidence on that, I want to make 2 points very clear. Firstly, I'm not here to argue that there are no gender differences, no biological or neurological gender differences. There's quite a lot of mixed evidence out there. A lot of the gender differences that were previously argued to be quite strong, like verbal ability, spatial ability, emotional processing and so on. Meta-analytic studies, where they take data from multiple studies to try and find out a bigger picture of what's going on, suggest that there is some small gender difference in some of these abilities, and yet the overlap between males and females is much, much larger than any difference between them. So there may well be differences there, but if there are, they're quite small relative to the overlap. So instead of focusing on these differences, really it makes sense to focus on the overlap. But that's not what we do as a society, particularly with children. So whereas by adulthood we have this societal drive towards gender equality, so we have this legislation to ensure that men and women are provided with equal opportunities and so on, with children we artificially create this huge difference between them. So colour gender associations are completely artificial, it's actually very arbitrary. So we know that 50 years ago there was research done in Europe, Central Europe, that found there was no colour gender associations in society. 100 years ago, the opposite pattern to the one we now know was very common. So people were told that pink was a masculine colour because of its relationship to red, which is the colour of blood and war, and a very masculine colour. Blue, on the other hand, was promoted as a kind of delicate colour that would be suitable for girls. So it seems to be quite recent, and it's not entirely cross-cultural. There was research published a few years ago trying to argue that there was an evolutionary basis for the pink-blue preferences, that in the ancestral environment boys would be out hunting in the wild, looking at the horizon and having to focus on the sky, and so they'd be attracted to lots of blue things, whereas the girls would be near to the home hunting for berries, which were all pink and blue. But given the fact that this is such a recent phenomenon, that it's not totally cross-cultural, it suggests that this is nonsense and it's a purely culturally defined association. And it is fairly obvious where it comes from. The whole commercialisation of having to buy two of everything is very obvious. There's an obvious motivation for us to be given this message. Okay, so I'm not here to argue that there are no gender differences. I am here to argue that we artificially exaggerate gender differences. So my second point is that I'm actually not here to say that gender stereotyping is wrong. And that's why I'm apologising to the people who are interested in gender studies. Regardless of my personal opinion, this is Cafe Science, and we're here to talk about research. So all I can do is tell you about the evidence that's relevant to gender stereotyping, not take a position on whether, as a society, we should consider gender stereotyping a good thing or a bad thing. That's not my role. All I can do is share research with you so that you can make an informed decision about how much you want it to be part of your life. Okay, so rather than arguing that gender stereotyping is wrong per se, I do want to point out a big paradox that's in our society. So this fact that we create these separate environments for boys and girls, so that they are so different that they're not even allowed to use the same cutlery. The message that they get from that is that they're so different that they're like different species. So boys and girls are seen as completely different creatures. And then by the time they get to adulthood, when they turn 18, if you treat men and women as different species and deny them the same opportunities and openly apply stereotypes to them, then that's illegal. We can't do that. So based on what we know about how stereotypes form and how they strengthen, then that's a huge paradox. We can't bring children up to believe that men and women are very different and then expect them to suddenly forget all that information and treat men and women as if they're the same. So that's my position on this.